All right, we are back with a new video, and today I decided to rank all of the best animated feature nominees for this year's Oscar Awards. And this was an interesting list for me to put together. I obviously sat down and watched each of the five nominees, and now I'll be ranking them. Now, this will be a ranking of how I feel about them as individual films. This is not a ranking on how likely I think it is that they'll actually win the award. I feel like that is a slightly different list, but probably not too different. But with that, let's get right into it. So, starting out the list at number five, the worst film to be nominated for Best Animated Feature for me is Raya and the Last Dragon. And I know not too many people love this film, and I wasn't expecting too much going into it either. Watching it gave me some enjoyment, but I just found it all right. And for me, it was easily the worst film to come out this year, despite it being not too bad. Now, the first thing I thought was how similar the premise is to MLP and New Generation. I know I worked in an MLP reference in this video. Both films are about a people that used to be unified, but over time became more divided to the point where they broke off into segregated societies that are somewhat hostile against each other, and it's up to the heroes to go on a MacGuffin search they think will solve all the world's problems, building a ragtag team of strangers from each of the different societies along the way, only for them to discover in the end that the real solution is friendship. Okay, there are some differences, but you get the general idea. I mean, this film doesn't have a racial element to it, unlike A New Generation, or a side plot where one of the societies gets a populist leader with warmongering ambitions, and it's also not a musical. Anyway, the first thing I'll note about the film itself is the pacing. I thought it was interesting how it started with a 20-minute flashback, which is meant to serve as the inciting incident, and then within 5 minutes of time jumping forward, Rhea finds Sisu, and it's not long afterwards that they get the first, well, technically second piece of the orb. Similarly, towards the end, the all is lost moment where Rhea accidentally kills Sisu leads directly into the climax where the Droon starts destroying the city. In general, I didn't find the film drag too much, which is a credit to it. I also found Sisu and Mari moderately interesting characters. And finally, I really like the aspect of Varana, Namari's mother, saying that Fang needs to be the one with all the gem pieces to ensure the other states can't fight back against him. Oh, with all that said, there are problems with this movie. I mean, for one, I found the relationship between the different states pretty underdeveloped. Yes, there's some stuff like what I just said about Fang, Tong not initially not trusting the others, and I guess there's Talon being full of pickpockets. But I thought we were going to get more of these people not trusting outsiders and talking trash about people from the other states, blaming them for the state of the world. Instead, it feels like the return of the Droon has given our heroes enough common ground to work together without too much trouble. And considering the film's main message is to trust people more, that's kind of a problem. You also have the ending, which doesn't make a lot of sense. So Sisu dies and the Droon destroy the Fang capital, Namari is ultimately the one to put all the pieces together, allowing the gem to work its magic, drive away the Droon, and unfreeze all the people in the stone, but it also unfreezes the dragons, which it didn't do the first time, and brings Sisu back to life despite literally dying. I guess bringing all the dragons back was to assure us that the people wouldn't be as divided moving forward, as the opening implies that the division stemmed not from the initial peace, but from all the dragons disappearing, creating a scarcity of their magic. Like, I get that the whole crux of the film is Rhea having to learn to trust people, and it's that added element that allows the gem to go the extra step and unfreeze the dragons. But even then, I feel like the concept is muddled in several respects. For one, Sisu makes such a big deal about the fact that her siblings trusted her the first time they created the gem, and that's what gave her the confidence that it would ultimately work. It motivates them to extend an open arm to others throughout the story and gives her the authority to teach Rhea this lesson. Why does Rhea and Namari learn to trust each other matter more than Sisu learning to trust her siblings? And also, while our protagonist learns to trust each other more, what about the rest of the people in all these societies? You would think that truly solving the world's problems requires a more systemic lowering of barriers. What about all those concerns of the other kingdoms taking it out on Bang? What reason does anyone else have in any of these societies have to change their ways. What? That the dragons came back? I don't know. I feel like after the movie set up some interesting ideas, it kind of just throws them all to the wayside just to have an easy, happy ending. At the end, nothing too terrible, but also not something I can particularly praise either. So overall, the film was fine. There were aspects of it that I liked, and the ending, it had some promise, but I feel like it doesn't fully deliver, and that's a big reason that I can't really rate this film too high. So because of that, I have it here at number 5. Now we're moving on to number 4, and this is sort of a weird film to talk about because it's one that I think I would like based on like me enjoying slice of life, but there are problems with it. And here we have Luca, and Luca was fine. So first up, I like the film style. I mean, while the animation itself is your typical Pixar style, I like how the fantasy segments are set up. In general, I also appreciate the spirit that it was going for. I mean, as someone that does enjoy slice of life, I'm glad they kept its scope relatively small. I mean, I know the director even said that they were inspired by Miyazaki and they wanted to make a film like that. And it kind of is, although it definitely falls into a lot of the Pixar tropes. And along with those lines, there were several scenes I thought were pretty well done, mostly in the beginning when Luca first comes on a land. And obviously, we see him taking the sun and the leaves, and obviously he meets Alberto for the first time and they try to make their fake Vespa. And obviously a lot of that is very nice and really encapsulates the small scale that this film is going for. But with all that said, however, I feel like the film doesn't properly explore all the ideas that it sets up. So with Luca, we know that he's scared, but also curious. And part of the reason he connects with Alberto is that he's a foil and that by staying on the surface, they can explore the world together. Yet later on, we see the two grow apart as Luca gets closer to Julia. Luca learns about science and human stuff, which makes him want to go to school. And Alberto doesn't like this because Luca is his only friend and wants to explore the world on a Vespa, but feels that he can't go to school because he thinks he's dumb. Like, I get that Alberto's whole shtick is that he's broken on the inside despite being all cool on the outside. And his father abandoned him, and that they wanted this to be this big reveal following the all is lost moment, but I feel like the film could have benefited from clarifying what the Vespa truly represents for him. Does it represent freedom? Does it represent exploration? Or does it represent learning? It's kind of those things, but it's kind of vague as well. Like, I mean, yeah, like, I guess the surface world kind of represents the unknown and how they want to explore that, but they literally are from the ocean, like, which is arguably more liberating than anything on the surface and certainly the road system. So I feel like the whole sea monster premise kind of gets in the way with that. I feel like it might have been better if they were just humans from the beginning and maybe Luca just ran away from home. I mean, there's also the element of Alberto worrying that Luca wouldn't keep his identity a secret if he went to school, which just kind of felt thrown in. I mean, they're already risking their identities as it is. So on the whole, the film could have done a better job at exploring this conflict between learning about the world through school and learning through exploration. I mean, I guess you could argue that they're different characters and that they have different learning styles, but it's still not particularly great. You know, on a similar note, I don't think the actual blow up between Luca and Alberto is handled well either. I mean, like Alberto outs himself as a sea monster in front of Julia, and when Urkele just happens to stop by, Luca throws him under the bus by saying there's a sea monster there. And then Julia tells Luca that he can't stay here because he won't keep the sea monster stuff a secret. Then Luca finds Alberto, and there's the whole reveal that Alberto's father abandoned him. But then Luca decides he's going to win the cup for both of them. And then it's only 10 minutes later when Luca is already through most of the race where Alberto just randomly shows up, and I guess everything's fine at that point. Okay, so admittedly, I found that a bit rushed. The ending where Julia's father and the whole town accepts them for being sea monsters was also kind of underwhelming. Like, it just kind of comes out of nowhere, and it just felt like kind of unearned, in my opinion. I mean, I guess that they saw that sea monsters are good people willing to help each other, but still, it's like, okay, it was getting towards the end of the movie, so whatever. Like, I know I just spent some time ragging on this film, but at the end of the day, I just felt it was fine. I mean, for the most part, it was a typical Pixar film, which isn't a bad thing. I mean, I like the characters all right. And I do like the spirit that it was going for, where it was trying to be the smaller stake stuff, But I won't lie that when I say that Pixar has produced much better work in the past. And while it did try to be different stylistically, like it still fell into a lot of the same traps that a lot of Pixar films do, where you have that end of the second act breakup and you have all this random conflict thrown in for no real reason. So there are definitely flaws with this film, and I feel like a lot of it doesn't come together super well. So because of that, I have it here at number four. Now we're moving on to number three, and this film is certainly better than the other two. I feel like this film has more going on thematically, and even from a character standpoint, I felt like it was a bit more interesting. But at the end of the day, I feel like it still falls into a lot of similar traps that I just mentioned earlier. And here we have Encanto. I know we're already wrapping up the Disney films on the list, and I'll say up front that of the films on this list, I think Encanto is the most likely to actually win the award for best animated feature. I mean, like I said, this is not a ranking of how likely I think it is that they'll win the award. I feel like if that were the case, then this would probably be number one, in my personal opinion. But if we're just talking about my personal thoughts on the film, I think number three is where it should go. And I think it's pretty good, though not without some issues. For one, the music's pretty good. I feel like all the songs have at least something to offer. Though admittedly, We Don't Talk About Bruno is my least favorite song. It's sort of crazy how it ended up being like the most popular and how it sort of hit the top of the billboards. And I feel like that's kind of says a lot about me as a person. Like, I don't like it as much, so of course it's gonna be at the top of the billboards. I mean, if you ask me, my favorite songs are probably the opening number, but also the song that Abuela sings towards the end, which obviously was nominated for Best Original Song. Most of the characters are pretty good as well. Some of them are underutilized, but granted, the ones that receive the least amount of screen time, like Peppa and Camilo, are among the less interesting. So I could take that or leave it. The ones that do get more screen time, namely Luisa and Isabella, have some good arcs over the film and have good songs. And I think the film's central theme that's setting up high expectations and forcing people to do things for the family is pretty interesting. I mean, at the end of the day, it's another be yourself tradition is stupid story, but it does a good job at highlighting how it isn't just Maribel that suffers from this. With all that said, there are some nitpicks I have with the story. There's a whole dinner scene where Dolores, the super hearing one, overhears Maribel's explanation of putting Bruno's vision together and can't keep her pie hole shut about it. Shenanigans ensue, the truth comes out, and the abuela ends up disappointed in Maribel, a recurring thing in this film. The movie establishes multiple times how good Dolores' hearing is, even having her hear Luisa's eye twitching the night. Obviously, Maribel has her first vision, and obviously that allows Maribel to talk to Luisa, and obviously that's something that really moves the plot forward. But literally that same night, we hear that Abuela talking to herself about the miracle being in trouble. So, and you're telling me that Dolores didn't hear that? So either Dolores didn't hear that despite being able to hear other random stuff, or she did hear it but managed to keep her pie hole shut for that. I don't know. That just felt kind of arbitrary in my opinion. There's also the scene where Bruno gives Maribel another vision, which implies that Maribel needs to reconcile with Isabella to save the miracle. And immediately I thought, no, that's not it. Well is the real problem. And I was mostly right, but I'll give the movie credit that the vision was technically correct. I mean, obviously the candle did bright up after Maribel and Isabella hugged. And again, I feel like there were just a couple nitpicks there. But honestly, my nitpicks for this film aren't as much as in Luca or Raya and the Last Dragon. And I feel like, again, the film has a bit more going on thematically. I felt like the dynamics between the characters were a bit more interesting than Luca. And because of that, I had this film here at number three. Now we're moving on to number two, and I feel like these top two are films that I think are pretty great. I mean, while I did get some enjoyment out of all five films on the list, I feel like these top two are pretty definitive for me. But there is a definitive number two as well, and here we have Mitchell's versus the Machines. And similar to Encanto, I feel like Mitchell's versus Machines is a film that's a bit more likely to win the award. I mean, I think it's the second most likely film to actually win the award, and again, while I feel pretty confident that Encanto will do it, I feel like if it's not that, then Mitchell's versus the Machines is the next more likely. But if we're just talking about the film itself, I wasn't a huge fan of the premise given that it was about the end of the world stuff. And admittedly, after hearing good reviews about it, I was expecting to like this film despite the premise not being up my alley. And sure enough, that's what happened when I watched it. I think this film ended up being what I expected it to, with a lot of it centering around the family saving the world as advanced AI take over. But even beyond that, the film goes down the appropriate avenues to make it something moving. I mean, the main villain, Pal, has a compelling motivation where she feels like machines such as herself are taken for granted and easily disposable, despite playing a pivotal role in humans' daily lives. The main drama of Katie and Rick not seeing eye to eye and feeling forced to respect each other is interesting as well. We learn that Rick is deeply concerned that life will crush Katie's dreams, much like it crushed his own dream of living in the woods. I thought that was pretty interesting. While there's the inevitable all's lost moment where Rick finds out Katie had pretended to take his advice, and I'll admit the moment itself came kind of out of nowhere. Like you could tell they had to check off that box and make that happen somehow. You can tell that came at a point in the film where Katie had already come to terms with Rick and learned to genuinely appreciate him. For me, that's better than a lot of other films where it feels like the character is in the wrong is guilted into accepting the other character's ways following that all's lost moment. But here, when Katie feels bad for hurting Rick's feelings, it comes out of a genuine misunderstanding rather than I did something wrong, maybe it's time to learn my lesson. While I would have preferred there to be no All's Lost moment at all, I feel like it's handled better than most films. I also appreciate how the film doesn't villainize phones or technology the same way a lot of other road trips films do. I mean, I feel like it strikes a decent balance where, on one hand, technology can be harmful, both from a macro perspective of tech companies collecting data without much regulation, but also from a micro perspective of making it harder for people to connect with each other, but it can also be a useful tool for self expression and discovery. We see that with Katie, of course, and obviously a big part of the resolution where Rick realizes Katie cares about him comes from her films, which she expresses through, well, technology. So at the end of the day, it just depends on how we use technology, and I feel like I can appreciate the film for striking that balance. The film truly has a strong core of themes and characterization. But aside from that, the film is very funny. I mean, I think my favorite bits are when Rick tries using a computer. It also has a unique style to it, creating this 2D feel using CGI. The actually 2D drawing bits that permeate the film are also cute and quirky. And I know I already mentioned the characters, but they're very likable. And on the whole, I think there are very few flaws with the film. If I had to nitpick, I would say there are a few moments where they get a bit too cute with the style, and the jabs on big tech, while relevant, are a bit on the nose for my taste and could have been a tad more subtle. But on the whole, I really enjoy this film. I mean, it's definitely deserved a lot of the acclaim that it's gotten. And while I feel like Encanto will ultimately win the award, I feel like Mitchell's versus the Machines is clearly in second place for that. But I feel like if we're just talking about my thoughts on the film itself, there is one other film that I think is stronger, in my opinion. So because of that, I have it here at number two. And now at number one, the best film to be nominated for Best Animated Feature at the Oscars this year is Flea. Now, Flea is a pretty good film. Admittedly, I consider putting this one below Mitchell's versus the Machines, as this feels more in line with the types of films that win Oscars to begin with. I hate to use the word Oscar bait here, but this film does check off a lot of those boxes the Academy looks for. But despite this, I still found Flea a very good film. While this is hardly the first film that focused on the struggles of refugees and victims of political violence, it does focus on a period of history not often discussed. In this case, it follows Amin and his family fleeing to Russia in the late 80s and early 90s. I think a lot of people forget that the end of the Cold War didn't suddenly fix all of Russia's issues. And the film does a great job of highlighting those issues, such as empty shelves at grocery stores and corrupt police officers abusing their authority at every opportunity. Amin and his family had to resort to human trafficking in order to escape. And even at the end, when Amin is able to escape Russia, he's alone and has to lie about his past in order to keep the life his family worked hard to secure for him. We even see that playing out in the present, where the side plot involves him and being away from home to focus on his career, straining his relationship with his fiance. And the ending is fairly uplifting as well, where he comes to terms with his identity. He and his husband buy a house in the country, representing him settling down and finally having a place where he can rest. The film is thematically rich and doesn't get bogged down by the same storytelling conventions that the other films on the list have. Granted, some of that is helped by the fact that it's based on a true story, but it's also helped by the fact that this isn't a Disney film and not a Sony film. So because of that, it doesn't feel like it has to check off those boxes. There isn't an all is lost moment. I can't believe I made that a thing in this video, by the way. I mean, being gay adds another layer to his struggles. For most of the film, he never has an outlet for expressing those feelings, largely because his environment doesn't recognize it. It's all about survival and family and doing what you need to get that better life. It's only towards the end where we see him come out to his family. And the older brother, who he feared would reject him, takes him to a gay bar and tells him he knew all along. Admittedly, that moment was a bit rushed and one of the few nitpicks I have with the film, and in general, I feel like it could have done slightly better job at connecting his circumstances to his struggles coming to terms with being gay. However, I still think it was handled well. And stylistically, this film is also quite distinct, where it'll switch between its normal art style and this more minimalist sketch design, particularly for moments that Amin has difficulty remembering or just wasn't there to witness. And there's also plenty of parts shot in live action, which I felt was an interesting choice. I mean, you could argue whether it was warranted or not, but it still makes the film distinct. I just feel like when I'm looking at the films being nominated, I have to put this one number one. I feel like it does a lot of the things I want. I feel like it definitely delves into some serious subject matter. I think it's booned by the fact that it's geared towards a more mature audience. I mean, I'm not always one to say that mature films are better than family films, but I feel like in this case, I mean, this film just isn't as bogged down by a lot of the storytelling conventions that many people think have to be in every film. So I feel like I have to praise the film for avoiding those storytelling tropes that kind of grind my gears sometimes. And I feel like this film just honestly deserves to be number one on my list. So because of that, I feel like Flea is the best film to be nominated for Best Animated Feature. Although, admittedly, I don't think it's actually going to win. And there we go. That will do it for this week's video. If you like this content, be sure to like and subscribe. It really helps out the channel. Moving forward, I will continue to be covering more animated content. Moving forward, should be pretty fun. But for now, that is the video. See ya.